Join me and learn how to interpret tarot cards. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to interpret a life transition reading, so stay tuned. Hi everyone, it's Ray with Tarot Living. Thanks so much for joining. So on my channel, we talk about all things spiritual. So if you're interested in tarot, astrology, psychic development, you'll want to subscribe and make sure to hit the bell notification to be sure you get an email when I do post a video. And to learn how to read tarot cards, join me on Facebook for weekly tarot exercises and activities under my private group, Tarot Living Study Group. The link is in the description below. Hi everyone. So today I'm going to introduce you to a tarot spread that I created that can provide insight when someone is going through a transitional period in life. So in a moment, I'll review the type of life situations that could be applicable for this tarot spread. Then I'll interpret a sample reading for you. So let's get started. I would recommend that you get a pen, paper, and your tarot cards ready. There are 4 main points that you need to know about how to interpret this spread. So first, let's review some reasons or scenarios for using the transition spread. So for example, someone has lost their job or they're in a career transition for other reasons at this point in their life. So that's actually the scenario that we'll work with today. Alternatively, you could use this spread if someone has had a change in relationship status. So it could provide insight into how the person is transitioning from being in a partnership, for example, to being on their own. Or the spread could be used if an individual has decided to move across the country to start a new job or to start university. Essentially, I think it works well when you're going through a transition in life, whether it be due to unforeseen circumstances or because a decision has been made in life. So keep in mind the spread is not used to help someone make a big decision in their life. We leave decisions up to the individual. Rather, this spread focuses on the actual transition process that's already underway or will be underway shortly. Second, I recommend that you have all the cards upright in your deck and lay all the cards upright for all of the spread positions. So reverse meanings could come into play when certain cards fall within a position in the spread that weakens their meaning. However, I'll review this in more detail during my interpretation of the reading today. So don't worry if you're not familiar with this method in terms of using reversals. Third, I think it's important to ask a question prior to completing the reading in order to create focus and intention. Fourth, before reading each card individually, I would recommend that you do an overview of all of the cards within the reading in order to identify any matching suits, elements, or numbers. So let's now review this life transition spread and talk about each position. The first position is how you feel about the current situation. So this card will show how the person is feeling overall about the change and transition that they're going through. This card might highlight their emotions, for example, or any difficulties or stressors that they're experiencing. Or it could show that they're coping with the situation fairly well if a positive card comes up in this position. The second position is what door needs to close. In other words, what do you need to release? So this card will show what the person needs to consider releasing in order to move forward in the best possible way. So perhaps the person is reluctant to let go of something from the past that they had or were experiencing before the transition. Or this card position could reveal a particular reason that something is difficult to release, which prevents them from moving forward. All right, and the third position is what door needs to open. In other words, what do they need to embrace? So this card could highlight what the person needs to accept, embrace, or even bring more abundantly into their lives. Or it could represent the next phase of life that they need to approach with an open mind or open heart. Lastly, it could show the need to embrace someone in particular who could help them, for example, if it's a court card that comes up in this position. Okay, and position number 4 is practical next steps to move forward. So this position will show you what steps or actions the person could take to help them move forward to the next phase of life. So it may be an action that's needed or some type of planning or practical step that needs to be done, for example. And position number 5 is future potential outcome of transitional period. So this card will provide insight about the future with regard to the transition. So does it appear that things will settle and that he or she will regain balance? Or will there be something new upcoming in the near future? Or maybe even some further changes or adjustments that they need to make in order to manifest a desired outcome. It really depends on which card comes up in that final position. Note that if there is a very difficult card at the end, such as the Tower, you always have the option of pulling 1 to 2 more cards to shed more light on the situation for that individual. Okay, now that we've reviewed all the positions, let's go to the tarot table and I'll interpret a reading. So as a short recap, we're using a fictitious scenario where we've got a 45-year-old man who's recently lost his job after 10 years of service with the company. So therefore, he's facing a job change or a career transition. So a good question would be, I would like insight on the best way to move through the transition of losing my job, along with next steps for future employment. So the first step is to complete an overview of the reading and identify any similar numbers, elements, and themes that you see. So when I'm looking at all of these cards, the first thing that jumps out to me is that there's only 3 elements that are represented in the reading and no cup or water cards. So we have 1 wand card, which relates to the element of fire. There are 2 sword cards related to the element of air, and 2 earth element cards, the World and the King of Pentacles. However, no cup or water cards. So to me, this means that the individual may not be experiencing or processing this event through his emotions as much as he is in other ways. So based on the air and sword cards, he might be experiencing and trying to deal with the situation more mentally or logically than he is emotionally, for example. So we also see some stress associated with the 10 of Wands card, which can point to physical exhaustion as another example. So these are all ways a person might feel the heaviness of a difficult transition when there are no cup or water cards in the reading. Okay, and the second thing that I notice is that there is a theme of endings and beginnings in this reading. So it's already a reading about transition, but there is an extra focus on endings and beginnings here. So we have the 10 of Wands, which is at the end of the Wand suit. We also have the World card, which is at the end of the Major Arcana suit. Then we have the Ace of Swords, which is at the very beginning of the Sword suit. So these cards highlight and strengthen the theme of change and transition in this reading. And we'll talk about this more when we analyze the reading. The third thing I notice is that there's a great deal of stress and difficulty shown at the beginning of the reading, but as it progresses, the reading becomes more and more positive and shows stability by the end. So generally speaking, this suggests that the individual will be able to work through some of those current challenges and move into a more positive phase as he undergoes this transition. So those are some of the things that you can pick up when you're doing a general overview of the reading before you look at each card individually. So it's a very valuable tool to use. All right, and the next step is to take a look at each card individually. The first position relates to how the person feels about the current situation of losing his job, and the 10 of Wands came up. So to me, this card really reveals the enormous weight and difficulty of the situation. So it's really possible this individual is feeling very stressed or weighed down by the challenge of obviously not having a regular job and income at this point. So this person might be trying very hard to figure out how to move forward, but maybe feeling really overwhelmed by the whole process of finding new employment. For example, he may be feeling very bogged down by all of the organization and effort that's required to apply for various jobs. And as well, I think the 10 of Wands could also suggest a level of financial burden being felt. He's probably concerned about fulfilling various responsibilities, such as the burden of carrying a house payment, car payments, or family expenses without a regular income coming in. It's also possible he feels very physically heavy or exhausted from the stress of losing his job, almost like the weight of the world is on his shoulders. So I think this is a really significant card, and those are some of my ideas of how you could interpret it in this spread position. All right, the second position is what door needs to close? In other words, what needs to be released? And the 8 of Swords showed up. So the 8 of Swords is also another heavy card, showing a sense of entrapment in one's own mental thinking. That's what it typically can refer to. So it's very possible in this reading that the person is, maybe overthinking or even obsessing about the entire situation. He might also be feeling a self-imposed prison or entrapment in his own mind, imagining that he has very few options available, when in reality, he probably does have several options to move forward which we'll see in a moment. But with the Eight of Swords, there's often a feeling of self-doubt or powerlessness. So given the card position of what door needs to close, it would be helpful for him to release and let go some of this negative mindset or overthinking that's likely not helping the situation. Now, something to keep in mind is that sometimes a card lands in a position within a spread in which the meaning would be weakened, so reading it reversed would make a lot more sense. So for example, if this card had been the Star card, you could consider reading it reversed to understand what the person needs to release or let go of, because that's the spread position that we're dealing with. We would do that because the Star card in this spread position would be weakened, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to read it upright. But reading it reversed would provide some really insightful information. So that's a method you can try if you did have a positive card that comes up in this spread position. All right, and the third position is what door needs to open. In other words, what should this individual embrace? And the World card came up in this position. So this is a really lovely card that brings in a totally different energy than, of course, the first two cards. So in this position, I see the World card as a sign that one phase is ending and a new phase is just around the corner. And that's because this card is at the very end of the cycle of the major arcana cards. And we see that same theme of an ending when we look at the Ten of Wands. So generally speaking, the World card can often suggest fulfillment, attainment, or completion after a great deal of effort over a long period of time. So the way I would interpret this card is that it's really important for this individual to remember the years of hard work that he put into his previous career job. So perhaps he needs to embrace the work experience and accomplishments in his previous role. So if he sees himself as an accomplished person, then potential employers are much more likely to see him in that light as well. So given that, I think just overall, he needs to focus on his skills and abilities that he's developed and honed over the years and embrace that aspect of himself. And secondly, I think the World card in this position is really positive and suggests the need to look at things much more open-mindedly or broadly than what we see in the Eight of Swords. So in that card, everything was very internalized and there were a lot of self-imposed limitations. But the World card suggests that he needs to open the door to all the potential job opportunities and maybe speak to various types of people. So I'm saying that because the symbols around the four corners of the card are representing each of the four elements. So this could suggest that there are many options or people who could assist him along the way on his job search journey. But he needs to think more broadly, promote his own skills and achievements, and also consider applying for various types of jobs. So that's my interpretation of this card. I'm sure there are other ways of looking at it, but those are some of my ideas that I can share with you. And similar to the previous spread position, just keep in mind that sometimes cards land in a position in which they're weakened, so you can read them reversed, which would make a lot more sense. So the World card is very strong in this position because it's about what you need to embrace. However, if it was a very negative or challenging card here, such as the Devil, I would suggest that you read it reversed. So reversed, it could mean that you need to open the door to releasing yourself from any self-sabotage or not trapping yourself into any negative thinking. So that's just an example if you had a negative card that came up in this position and how you could read it reversed. All right, I'll review the last two cards shortly. However, before I do that, just a reminder to like this video and leave me a comment. I love hearing from you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'll be posting several more videos with various tarot spreads that you might find really interesting. Lastly, don't forget to sign up to my private tarot study group on Facebook. I post various weekly tarot exercises and activities. The link is in the description below. So let's now review the last two cards in this reading. All right, and the fourth card is practical next steps to move forward, and the Ace of Swords came up. So this card in the fourth position could suggest that there's a need for some logical thinking, planning, and organizing, given this is a sword card that relates to the element of air. Or it could also suggest that he needs to sharpen his communication or interview skills, and I say that because the sword cards in the tarot deck relate to communication. So I think overall, given the Ace of Swords coming up in this position, I would suggest that he write down ideas and plans, maybe make some lists for potential employers, or even just think about how he can logically or systematically, send out resumes or letters. I think anything related to logic or communication or planning would be very good in terms of practical next steps to move forward. Additionally, the Ace of Swords can relate to truth, determination, and making clear decisions. So this person may need to gain some clarity or get really honest with himself about what type of work he wants to transition into and maybe what type of work he doesn't want to transition into. So one of the practical steps may be that he's gaining clarity and making some clear-cut decisions about what direction to go next. Okay, and the fifth position is future outcome of the transition period, and the King of Pentacles turned up. So this is a court card, but it can provide us with some really interesting information about how things could potentially develop in the near future. So first, I would look at this court card as a sign that things will settle and become more stabilized in the world of work and money, given that the King of Pentacles is often associated with business and finances. So he's actually ruled by the astrological sign of Taurus, which is a stable, earthy sign. It's what we call a fixed sign in astrology. So to me, it suggests that the upheaval we see at the beginning of the reading will likely settle as time goes on in the future. Secondly, you could read this card as the role the client himself might be taking on in the future. So given this is a king, he could potentially be moving into a professional role of manager, director, or leader in some way. Additionally, the King of Pentacles is associated with being a business person. So opportunities related to business, insurance, or finance could also be relevant. And lastly, this king is sometimes associated with real estate, land, and property. So those are all some interesting ideas that you could communicate to the client, just given the characteristics of the King of Pentacles. So I think overall, this is a really positive card in this position. It not only gives us a glimpse into the potential opportunities for what type of work, but it also gives us insight into the outcome of the transition period. Namely, the fact that we're seeing a lot of upheaval at the beginning of the reading, and then as we move through the reading and we end with the King of Pentacles, we're seeing a period of stabilization. So I hope this helps you to understand how I would interpret this reading. There's always many ways to interpret each card, but I do hope that this has generated some ideas for you. So please give this spread a try. Don't forget to leave me a comment and let me know if you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching Tarot Living.